Let's jump right in. Have you ever wondered what happens when a clinical psychologist, a literary critic, a philosopher, and a decision scientist all sit down to deconstruct one of the most famous novels of our time? Well, in today's Explainer, we're taking a totally different, imaginary, high-level scholarly look at Matt Haig's massive bestseller, The Midnight Library.
Now, this whole discussion is really grounded in a pretty heavy, deeply personal truth. The protagonist, Nora, finds herself in this magical library hovering right between life and death, mostly because she believes her very existence is a burden. But as our panel of scholars points out, this isn't just some clever plot device. It's actually a powerful emotional echo of Matt Haig's own real-world struggles with severe depression.
To truly unpack the depths of this novel, we are going to explore it through 5 specific lenses: the author's hidden guilt, insight versus depression, rigging the library, acceptance versus change, and finally, the modern trap.
All right, so starting with part 1, the author's hidden guilt. Let's peel back the curtain a bit on this personal layer. How much of Nora is actually Matt Haig? Well, when we look at Nora's intense feelings of being a burden, we're really looking at the author's own retrospective guilt. And this perfectly illustrates this brilliantly frustrating depressive contradiction, the totally irrational coexistence of feeling completely worthless while simultaneously believing you are somehow responsible for everyone's suffering. I mean, logically, you can't be a total nobody while also possessing this godlike power to ruin everybody's destiny, right? But emotionally, in a depressed mind, those two conflicting feelings coexist perfectly.
Researchers actually have a term for this use of idealized alternate realities. They call it upward counterfactuals. Instead of just, neutrally imagining what could have been, a suffering mind only imagines the flawless futures they somehow missed out on. Then they use those impossible idealized fantasies as a weapon against their current self. It's wild, but guilt kind of becomes this strange form of control. Because if everything is your fault, well, at least there's a reason for the pain.
Moving on to part 2, insight versus depression.
So this brings up a massive question. Does the novel accurately portray depression, or does it make recovery look just a little bit too neat? The clinical perspective warns us that this really clean narrative sequence, where you feel despair, you learn a lesson, you shift your perspective, and boom, you're miraculously cured, risks implying that clinical depression can simply be fixed by an instant spark of insight. But in reality, depression isn't just a bad attitude. It's not just a failure to appreciate life. A person can know for a fact that they are loved and still be terribly, terribly ill. So while the book is a beautiful, elegant metaphor, it does represent a bit of a fantasy of this perfect, immediate therapeutic access that just doesn't really exist in the real world.
So instead of focusing on a magical cure, the true clinical takeaway here is something called epistemic humility. Nora doesn't just magically stumble into the perfect life, she simply realizes that she doesn't know enough to give up. The most powerful message isn't some toxic positivity like, everything is awesome. It's actually much simpler. It's, I don't have enough data to declare my story over. The library doesn't cure Nora's depression at all. What it actually does is restore her access to possibility. But what if the library makes recovery look too neat? Well, this Socratic pivot leads us directly into our next scholarly lens, where we challenge the very architecture of the book itself. Think about it. If the library is essentially a magical therapy machine, who exactly built the machine?
Which brings us to part 3, rigging the library. When we dive into the literary and philosophical mechanics, we realize the library really isn't a neutral place. In fact, you could argue Nora's free will is a total illusion, because the library selectively curates her experiences to force a very specific realization. Think about it. The library constantly sets Nora up to fail in her alternate lives just so she can learn a lesson. It never just lets her stumble into a life that is genuinely beautifully better without a massive catch. It basically operates like a rigged escape room designed entirely around her regrets, meant to guide her right back to exactly where she started.
And that forces us to ask a really interesting question. Is Mrs. Elms simply Matt Haig's proxy? Is she just stepping in to hand Nora the exact experiential proof the author himself probably wished he could have received during his own dark times? Mrs. Elm is the ultimate fantasy guide. She knows exactly what you need to see, exactly when to challenge you, and when to withhold information. She's honestly less of a librarian and more of the author's protective hand, just making absolutely sure that Nora survives.
Let's shift gears to part 4, acceptance versus change.
Now, fast-forwarding a bit, an uncomfortable philosophical question emerges from the decision scientist's perspective. What if simply accepting your life is actually dangerous? You see, the novel's ending can easily be misread. There is a massive, absolutely crucial difference between accepting reality so you can act on it and just resigning yourself to a destructive situation. If you take the book's message as just, hey, the grass isn't greener, just be happy with what you have, well, that could be terrible advice for someone in an abusive relationship or deeply toxic job. Acceptance shouldn't mean staying paralyzed. It should mean accepting reality so you can finally begin the work to repair it.
The decision scientist hits the nail on the head here. They highlight that if we completely sterilize our regrets, we actually lose a vital internal alarm bell, one that tells us our current life desperately needs changing. Sure, those upward counterfactuals we talked about earlier can hurt, absolutely. But regret can also be incredibly useful information. It might literally be your brain telling you that you need to quit your job. We really shouldn't be aiming for a life with zero regret. Instead, we should be figuring out which regret is trying to punish us and which regret is just trying to wake us up.
And you know, Haig himself actually admits that Nora returning to her original life isn't an endorsement of the status quo. It's an endorsement of reclaiming your own authorship. The goal isn't to suddenly realize your life is perfect. The goal is to survive long enough to realize that your current life is the only workspace you have left to build something meaningful. Once you finally accept that, the real ultimate question becomes, what are you going to do about it today? What are you now responsible for changing?
But right as we reach this peak of understanding, a pretty terrifying modern reality starts to loom over us. Because while Nora Seed had to literally almost die to visit the Midnight Library, we don't. We literally just have to reach into our pockets.
Which brings us to our final lens, Part 5, The Modern Trap.
We are standing right on the edge of a world where social media algorithms and endless digital options have created a real-life midnight library sitting right there in our pockets. Now, to explore this modern optimization trap and see how the imaginary panel dissects it, you have to read the rest of this brilliant explainer. Please visit imaginarytalks.com/The Midnight Library explained by scholars and Matt Haig. Seriously, you do not want to miss how this breakdown ends. But before you go, ask yourself this. If your phone could show you exactly what you missed out on today, would it set you free or would it keep you trapped?